Hi guys, Shaun O'Gorman here. Welcome to the first Strong Life webcast. It's something that I absolutely just couldn't get enough of, and in the end of that journey, unfortunately, ended up with PTSD, depression, and suicide. And that was all very much off the back of everything I saw and what had happened in that career, and also my lack of willingness to want to reach out and ask people for help. So I was too scared to look like a coward, or too scared to look like I was weak, to actually reach out and ask anyone for help, which is pretty sad. But these days now, some 15 years later, I'm 47 years of age now. I was 31 when I left the job, and I was 19 when I joined. It's amazing to me that the difference I have in my attitude towards mental health and speaking out, and I really have made it my purpose to try and get this conversation going as much as we can to try and help other police, military, first responders, and just help people in general, men specifically, because women are great at talking to each other, men are hopeless. So with that, we'll kick off into the actual presentation, and I've touched on a little bit of what the start of what I was going to go through there. So just bear with me for 1 second. Excuse me if we have any. Really dark time, and also try and help prepare you guys so that you don't go through the same things going into it. So if I had have had a lot of this knowledge and a lot of this access to this education prior to being a police officer and during my career, then it would have made a massive difference to me. And I've got a unique perspective because as a cop myself for 13 years, and my dad's also a police officer, he was for 42 years, now retired, and he battled a lot of his own demons and his own, different incident stress situations through the police. He unfortunately had to take a guy's life in 1978 and has been involved in a lot of different firearms and violent incidents, more so than I had. And him and I have had this discussion over and over. So I've seen somebody go through it from the perspective of the child in the family, and I touch on that in this presentation. And I've also seen it, obviously, as the police officer myself, and then coming out the other side, the recovery process. And unfortunately, through a lot of that process, there was a number of things that I observed caused me a lot of grief. And those sort of things are people's opinions, the gossip, the conversations, and the stigma that I felt was attached to it, where I felt like a coward and I felt like I was weak, and I felt like I was the only one that this was occurring to. And then another big part of that is also taking responsibility for my own actions and my own decisions, because I chose to do the job the way I did it, which was 100 miles an hour, was very much bending the rules as far as, driving quick and taking out offenders and doing different things that the department I work for obviously didn't want me to do. But I was so motivated and so focused on being the best cop I could be, and literally wanted to help people make a difference and stand between crims and the decent members of society. So that's who I am. That's how I got here. And for me, for you guys, I just want to try and pass on anything I can that might help you understand why you might be experiencing the stuff you're experiencing, if you are, and also why you potentially operate the way you operate and the things that go on in your family and other things do, and try and give you some insight on how to stop that happening or prevent that having as big an impact as it does. So have it be as minimally impactful as it possibly can be. Now, anytime during this webinar, if you guys have got any questions, you've got any comments, just type them in that chat box and I can answer them for you easily. If there's anything you're not sure about or don't really understand. So this is, for me, one of the big issues for cops and for military and also for other first responders, but especially police and military, is that you face the unknown and the unknowable, and it takes a toll on your ability to relax and switch off. So one of the things that I find even now, 15 years after having been a police officer, is that there's certain behaviours I have and certain hyper-aware activities that I, just part of my personality and part of my everyday behaviour, that are definitely related back to being a police officer. And I'm sure you guys and girls can relate to it, that it's things like when I walk into a cafe or a restaurant with my kids or with my partner, Rach, or with friends or whatever, if I can't get the seat that has my back to the wall where I can see the entrance and I can see what's going on in the majority of the premises, then I find it really uncomfortable. Now, as time's gone on over the years, it's got less and less so, but it still is definitely something that has given me cause for concern or has made me uncomfortable because I can't see what's going on. Now, it goes back to obviously having been a cop for so long and always being on. So one of the things for police officers is you guys are out driving around, patrolling whichever section or unit you work in, waiting for shit to happen. So even if you're investigating something, you're very much hyper aware and vigilant of what could be occurring as you're going about those duties. If you're a first responder and a uniformed police officer or a first responder, dog handler, something like that, then you are driving around just waiting for that radio call that gives you the incident you're attending. It might be something violent, could be something firearm related, could be something really quite traumatic. So you're always on edge waiting for that to happen. So I just want you guys to understand that, because it really plays into the way that your mental health and what happens evolves for you as you go further and further through your career. So a lot of the incident stress, and when I talk about PTSD to me is become a real buzzword lately. So there's a lot of people talking about it. I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2001 in clinical depression and then battled suicide. But to me, PTSD is the end road of a long journey, and you can pull it up at any stage along that path. So for me to get to the point of PTSD, depression and suicide, and literally lying in bed for 3 nights in a row with a Glock pistol in my hand, that took a lot of time. So that just didn't happen overnight. So there was one particular incident I was involved in, was a shooting, a vehicle pursuit and shooting with 2 offenders who went out to look for suicide by cop. And in the end, we were in a vehicle pursuit for a fair period of time. They shot 24 bullets into the pursuit vehicle in front of me. I was second vehicle in the chase, and then when we crashed, chased on foot through a pedestrian mall, and they eventually both shot themselves probably 4 or 5 meters in front of me, and one died, one lived. Now, that was a pretty traumatic incident, but that was one of many. There was plenty of other things, plenty of other incidents, like, whether it was firearm incidents, taking guns off people, armed hold-ups, domestics, traffic accidents, whatever it was. Even the most inane, normal job, like a domestic or delivering a death message or something similar, leaves a little bit of a mark and leaves a little bit of it behind, because what it does is it affects you emotionally, because as human beings, we all feel that. So when you understand that, because you're hypervigilant and aware, and because you are constantly turned on, not in a good way, but you are constantly on when you're on duty, it's very difficult to turn that off at the end of your shift, because being a cop becomes part of who you are, not just something you do. And same for soldiers. So then you get to the end of your shift and you switch off and go home to relax with your family, and I'll touch on a couple of strategies to help you do that soon, but you're still always going to be on. So you're still on when you're in the cafe with your back to the wall. You're still constantly on when you're walking down the street, which I still find myself doing often, scanning people and scanning vehicles and just scanning the situation as I go. And a lot of the times I don't even realize I'm doing it. A lot of the times I find it's just a subconscious part of my nature, which is always just on the lookout. And I've got daughters that are 12 and 9, who obviously I love very much, and my partner, Rach, who's amazing. And if I'm walking along the street, especially with the girls, Rach is a very capable woman in herself. But when I'm walking along with the kids, I'm even more aware and more vigilant, because I want to make sure they're okay and look after them. Now, that whole behaviour, if I'm driving along in my vehicle and I'm scanning other vehicles, I'm looking ahead in the traffic, I'm looking at people in their cars, and it's just, I find myself doing it. And then a few times my daughters have said to me, "What are you doing, Dad? Why are you looking at that guy like that?" And when I catch myself, it's because I look at him and deem that he might be a undesirable, or he could be somebody who's potentially a threat, and maybe someone who's driving aggressively, could be anything. But I'm so hyper aware and hyper vigilant, waiting for something to happen, that I'm always on. Now, for me these days, because I work in a corporate job, I'm not a cop anymore. There's not that same level of hyper awareness all the time, it doesn't present so much of a problem. But for you guys who are still operational police, it does. Because as operational police, you are absolutely always on and always hyper aware and vigilant when you're on duty. But then when you go home, you still will be maintaining a level of that hyper awareness and hyper vigilance. So 24/7, you guys never turn off. And one of the things that is a very good indicator that the job is having an effect on you is dreams. For many years, even before I got to the point of the PTSD, I would have very, very graphic dreams, animated dreams of, fighting offenders and chasing offenders with the dog, and pursuits and all those sort of things. And it was often pretty much 99% of the time it involved violence. Then they eventually got to the point of flashbacks to incidents. But the dreams are very much your subconscious or your brain or your mind trying to teach you how to deal with the shit you see, and use that as a warning sign that you need to do something and sort of unwind. And I use the analogy of emptying your bucket. So it's like you've got a bucket that you carry around inside you that fills up with the shit in your life, and policing just adds to that. And if you don't empty it, if you don't do something to look after yourself, then eventually you have a massive overreaction to whatever happens in your life. So whether that's to your wife or your husband, whether that's to your kids, if someone annoys you, if someone cuts you off in the traffic and you lose your shit, because it's not about that particular incident, it's about the build-up of stress and things that have been going on in your life, for a period of time. So when you can't switch off 100%, the problem then for you is that your body's always on. You're always in some sort of state of adrenal fatigue. Your mind's very aware and always churning, so it never gets to relax. And so therefore you just end up quite worn out. And it's one of the things that I've noticed when I look at police who I'm still very good mates with. I have a lot of friends who are still police. And the guys in the job, I find, seem to age prematurely. So I'm 47, and when I look at the other guys my age, they're quite grey and they look quite stressed and they're quite tired. And I believe a big part of that is, 10, 15, 20, 25 years of being in this hyper adrenal switched on state. Physiologically, your body is just moving 100 miles an hour all the time. But you become so used to it, you don't realise. So I went and saw a acupuncturist a few years ago on the advice of a friend, and when he sort of checked out my body, my system, and my sympathetic nerve system and all those things, he determined that my adrenal glands were locked on all the time. So my body was pretty much surviving on adrenaline. So when you guys are always on, you're always switched on, you're always hypervigilant, that's what's happening. You've got that hyperadrenal state. So that explains why you end up with the mental fatigue and some of the physical problems and that you do. So now what I want to do now is you move into how do you actually deal with that hyper-vigilant state, but how do you deal with the shit you see? Because that has the accumulative effect as you go through your careers. So realize that what you see and what you experience will have an effect on you. It's not, it might, it will. There's no doubt about that. Excuse me, I'm just having a drink. So because you cannot be an empathetic and normal and inverted commas human being, and there's no such thing as normal, but one of the things that I absolutely believe is police join the job they do, and military do the job they do, ambos, paramedics, firefighters, even corrective services officers, all those sort of people. We all joined the job that we did because we wanted to make a difference and help people. It's not something that many people talk about because it's not very popular to, say, oh, look, I want to help people and make a difference. I want to be the hero for other people. I did a podcast recently with Garrett Tesla in the States. He's a guy, runs the Squadron podcast. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's awesome. And him and I were having a discussion, and we were talking exactly about this. And I said, unfortunately, people don't want to admit they like to help people and make a difference. And as he said, I think the majority of us join the job because we want to be the hero, not in an egotistical or an arrogant sense, but in the sense of you want to be there to save people and help people. And you want to be the one running into the danger when other people are running out. And I believe that very much to be true. So if you are that sort of person, then you're quite emotionally invested in the job you do, then the things you experience will absolutely have an effect on you. It can't not. But what I want you to understand is that it is absolutely a normal part of what you do. So it's very normal to have that reaction. So to be emotionally impacted by seeing, whether it's somebody shot and killed, whether it's a bad traffic accident where someone's injured or killed, whether it's a domestic violence situation where, because of your experience and your gut instinct that the woman probably, in most cases it's females who are the victims, but the woman or the man who's the victim isn't going to do anything about leaving the situation and they feel trapped. The perpetrator is going to continue to dominate them and be physically and emotionally abusive. They're going to be living a shit life, but there's nothing you can do. You're hamstrung. You might be able to take out an order. You may be able to do whatever, but unless he or she is willing to step up, then unfortunately there's nothing you can do about it. And that's a devastating situation for somebody who joined a job to want to help people make a difference. So you understand that normal part of what you do, that normal part of wanting to help people is actually going to cause you quite a lot of grief because of the emotional effect of what you see. I was talking to someone recently, a cop recently, and I said to them, it's the sort of thing that my daughters are 12 and 9 years old. So thankfully, when I was in the job and when I left and was at my worst with PTSD, I didn't have my kids. But I look at those guys now and think, when I was doing the job, if I had have gone to a domestic situation or a traffic accident where a 9-year-old girl was killed, for instance, or a domestic situation where there was a 12-year-old girl who was obviously terrified for what was going on for her mum or dad or whatever the situation, then that would have had a real emotional impact on me because of how I would relate to her having my own 9-year-old daughter. So different situation if I was going to go to a job where there was a 60-year-old man that was hurt or killed. It would still be impactful, but it wouldn't have the same connection unless I connected him to my father or an uncle or whatever, or somebody that sort of had that impact where it made him more human. And people who aren't cops could hear this and feel like it's a bit of a flippant comment, but you learn through the job, and I'm sure you guys can understand, you learn to treat people as jobs or objects because that lessens the emotional impact. But still, that impact is there and is such a normal part of the job. And the only way that you're going to be able to deal with those normal parts of the job, and the only way that you will be able to deal with what you experience and how it affects you, is by talking about it. And this is one of the biggest messages I want to get out to cops and military and all first responders, actually, but to anybody who works in that emergency services sector and even people in general, but to you guys specifically, talk to the people around you that you trust. So talk to your mates and your buddies, talk to your friends that are in the police with you or firefighters or paramedics or soldiers or whoever. Talk to the people who can have a bit of a understanding or a bit of an empathy, or like somebody who's walked that path. And it could be someone like me who's like, I'm not a police officer now, but I certainly spent a significant part of my life doing it. So even though I'm not in the job anymore, I talk to mates of mine in the job about things I see and what happens. And it's just a way to help them decompress, because it's not like anybody can take away what you've seen, but you can absolutely get it out. And the more you talk about it, the less impact it's going to have on you. It's just that simple. And it might sound a bit Dr. Phil or a bit like Oprah. When you look at, generally women are fantastic at talking to each other. And that's why I believe we don't have the same sort of level of mental health problems and stress and suicide amongst females as we do amongst males in general society. Then when you come into the policing environment, I believe because a lot of women that join the job are very much alpha personalities like men. So it doesn't mean they're masculine, but it means they're very strong alpha leaders as females. So they naturally are probably going to go more towards that same institutional thinking of don't show weakness, don't talk about what's bothering you, etc. So that, unfortunately, it's going to have the same impact. But just talk to your mates and your friends that are around you. And I've found in recent years, as I've obviously, now that my book's come out, especially in the last week and a half since I've posted that on Facebook that I'm bringing the book out, the response has been overwhelming from police all around the world, from the States, I've been absolutely amazed who are reaching out and saying, thank God that someone's starting to talk about this, because I've been suffering with this stuff for a long time. And unfortunately, I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how that's going to end up for me. So, it's really difficult, because when nobody talks about it, then nobody knows what's going on. So when these guys reach out to me and give me these messages and say, look, thanks so much for what you're doing, it really makes a difference to me. I had an email from a police officer and on the other side of the world who had been in a really violent incident, and I've never met them. I've never spoken to them. I believe the only place that they would have seen my story or anything about it is on my website at the Strong Life Project. That's, it says I suffered PTSD, etc., etc. It says I come through the other side. It said I was involved in the violent incident, but it doesn't really give the depths of the story of what's going on. And at the end of that situation, this person is obviously, they've been in a violent situation themselves that involved where they were shot multiple times and survived, and then got to the point where they had to retire off the job where they are. And the email they sent to me, I believe, was probably written in, well, it was definitely written in the early hours of the morning. And the sentence structure and grammar in it suggested to me they'd probably been drinking, which, as we all know, is a self-medication for this incident stress, PTSD, etc. And what this person said to me was words to the effect, I'm in the darkest time of my life. I couldn't see a way out until I read your story. It was like looking in a mirror. Then I understood that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Thanks. Now, when I read that message, I was actually brought tears to my eyes. I was quite emotional, because I thought, wow, here's someone on the other side of the world who doesn't even know me, knows nothing about me. Because I put my story on a website, they've read it somehow and got a hold of it. And this was before I'd done any podcast interviews or radio interviews or the book or anything else. And they've obviously seen that story, and that short couple of paragraphs was enough to inspire them to know that they can do something better for themselves and that there's a way out of the darkness for them. And to me, I go, if I can do that one person on the other side of the world, if we all band together, and it might sound a little bit evangelistic, but if we all band together and start talking about this shit, then it becomes less of a problem, to the point where hopefully we can, it's never going to not be a problem at all, because the job you're in, the hypervigilance and awareness of the state you're in, the stuff you see, the shit you deal with, the people you deal with, means that it will have an effect. But if you can talk to your friends around you, talk to your mates, talk to your colleagues, then what it will mean is that the impact will be far less, because you'll understand that you're not the only person. You'll understand that there's other people going through exactly the same situation. You'll understand that there's a way out, and that you're not broken, you're not weak, you're not a coward. This is a very normal reaction. And they were all the things that, unfortunately, how I thought, because I didn't tell anyone. And the messages I get now from people in the last week and a half just going, wow, I would never have guessed in a million years that you had this stuff going on. And their words, not mine. You were so brave, courageous, and you never took a backward step. You never stopped. You worked so hard. I would never have guessed that. You always seem so happy. And it's because we get so good at the mask. We get so good at pretending that everything's okay. We get so good at the mask for the other people of the jovial, happy, sarcastic, funny guy who is the first one to kick the door in, is the first one to fight the offender. But behind that's being hidden a lot of sadness and a lot of emotional struggle and depression. And PTSD, depression, etc., is a medical condition. It's actually a chemical imbalance where your body is stopped producing serotonin, which is a feel-good chemical in your brain. And I believe it's because, and I've researched this, I'm not a doctor, obviously, but my absolute belief is because you're in that hyper-adrenal state where your adrenaline is pumping all the time because you're always on, your body goes, well, I don't need serotonin, stops producing it. So part of it is a accumulation of those physiological factors. The other part is the emotional injury of seeing really violent incidents, right? So if you talk to your mates, talk to the people around you, it's as simple as, if you can go to a violent incident, get back in the car with your partner, get back to the station at the end of the day in your squad or your unit or whatever, whatever you call it, and just go, you know what? That shook me up. That was pretty tough. That whatever it was, that guy shooting at us, or that dead body we saw, or that that, sudden infant death baby that we saw, it's really hit me. And they go, oh, yeah, me too, mate. And then you just talk about it. And you can still talk about it in the same black humor that police have, because that's a way of dealing with what we see. You can still talk about it and still maintain your tough guy alpha personality. But just talk about it, because once you get that shit out of your head and once you talk about it and realize that other people have the same reaction, then a lot of the devastating power of it disappears. And when you get to the point where you're having flashbacks and you're having nightmares and those things are happening, if you're having trouble sleeping, any of those type of things, and there's a protocol, I guess you'd call it, from the Canadian Police that I know Queensland Police are just adopting. The Australian Federal Police, I met one of their commanders the other day, and he was an amazing guy. And Grant Edwards, he's a guy who has come out with his own PTSD story and doing a lot around mental health for law enforcement. Just an amazing guy. And him and I were talking a lot about these sort of things. And one of the things that we were discussing was the fact that when this stuff happens, when you get to the point where it's difficult, when you've had those incidents that have occurred, that have accumulated, when you've had a lot of that emotional, stress and injury that occurs, go and see professionals. There's no weakness or no sadness, no cowardice in that. It's actually showing great courage to go, you know what, I need to go and get some help so I can continue doing the job I love. And it's the reason I left the police is because I didn't get help. And I got to the point where I just physically couldn't do it anymore, emotionally couldn't do it anymore because of the trauma I'd experienced. But if I had have had the guts to actually go and talk to someone, I would still be in the job. I'd still be a police officer. I actually have no doubt about that. And I don't have any regrets, because what I've been through and what I've learned and the education coming out means I can pass that to you guys and maybe help you live a longer and happier career. But it's a simple thing. If you break your leg, you go and see a doctor. You don't strap it yourself. If you get shot, you don't pretend nothing happened and just go home and try and stitch it yourself, Johnny Rambo style. The irony is, when we get physically hurt, we're so happy to deal with doctors and medical professionals, people who can help us. When we get emotionally injured, we all get terrified and don't want anyone to know, and it's just bullshit. So the earlier you get that professional help to start emptying that bucket I talked about earlier, then the earlier that stuff's going to actually help you and the less impact it's going to have on you long term. It is just that simple. So if you can actually get yourself sorted and make sure that you can be in that situation of getting that professional help and getting somebody to give you the strategies and tools early on, then the problem probably will never get to the point where you're suffering PTSD and different things. And even talking to someone like me, listening to podcasts, reading articles, listening to these webinars, reading books about other people's stories and what they do, that's all part of that education. That's all part of that process. So don't be afraid to think that what's going on in that point isn't helping, because that's all helping. It's all the same stuff. What it's actually doing is helping you move further and further through that whole process and make sure that you don't let it have that effect on you long term. So that's the best way for you to start dealing with what's going on, talking to your friends, getting that professional help. Then you come back to the part that I think is so important and very, very, very rarely talked about. And it's the impact on your family from the job that you do. So being a police officer, obviously, is a job that has an impact on you and changes you. So often I hear the conversation from different people saying, oh, it's really changed him or her. They're a lot harder now. They're a lot tougher. They're a lot more cynical. And I understand that, because you deal with people at the worst times in their life. And one of my favorite things to say is, police never turn up on your door. Soldiers never turn up on your door. Paramedics, firefighters, nobody like that ever turns up, knocks on the door and says, hey, just thought we'd drop in and say, you're doing an amazing job. You're killing it. Life's amazing. Thought we'd drop in and have a cup of coffee, say hello. Police and military and paramedics especially, and ultimately police and military, only interact with people when there's some form of conflict or some form of problem. And the amount of that trauma and the amount of the difficulties that you experience means that you really are going to see that the impact will flow through from you back to your family. So it'll flow through back to your wife, your kids, because you won't have that ability to switch it off, and they won't actually understand that what you're going through and what you're experiencing is why you are the way you are at home. Because too often you want to try and isolate and insulate them from what you see at work, and I get it. But when you're doing that, you're going to carry the effect back into your life, and they're not going to understand why. So it's definitely going to have an effect on the way you interact with your family, because the more violent, difficult, traumatic things you see, the more you're going to distance yourself, and the more you're not going to understand why they're pulling away from you, and they won't understand why you're pulling away from them. So when you're dealing with your family, you need to be able to explain to them what's going on for you. Now, you don't have to go into gory details. You don't have to pass on the impact. You don't have to do any of that. But as you come home to your husband or wife and your kids or your partner, whatever your situation is, that ability to come home and say to them, I've had a really tough day today. I've seen some pretty horrific stuff. I don't want to talk to you about the details because I don't want it to upset you, but just understand that, I might be a bit quiet, or I might be a bit short-tempered, or I might be whatever. If you've got the guts to actually have those chats, and it might sound a little bit naive to think you can, but I absolutely believe you can. If you've got that sort of situation set up with your husband, wife, kids, to come home and go, you know what, listen, mum or dad didn't have a great day at work today. It was pretty tough. It's pretty difficult. So, please understand that I might be a bit snappy, or I might be a bit cranky. It's not about you, and I just need some time to myself. And they go, okay, cool. Whereas if you just come home, lock yourself away, doing whatever, if you're watching sport on TV, or you do whatever the thing is that you do to unwind, and you're ignoring them, or you're short-tempered and snappy with them, they don't understand you've had a shit day at work. They just think it's their fault, especially with kids. And I find even with my two girls, when they were a lot smaller, but even still today, we've got an agreement that goes, if I've got the shits with them about something, or they think I do, if I'm just cranky or tired, then they can say to me, how do you get, so a question just come through, how can I get my kids to ask me if I'm angry at them or if I'm just angry cool? And that's what I'm just touching on. So thanks so much for sending that question through. And you guys just shoot for your questions and comments as we go, because the more you send them to me, the more that I can understand where, the information you need and what you want to get out of it. But how can I ask my kids if I'm angry? What I'm just touching on with my girls, I say to them, you just say to me, Dad, are you angry at me, or are you angry at something else? And what it does is it's just enough to catch me in the moment. And when they say to me, oh, are you angry at us, Dad? Are you angry at something else? I go, sorry, guys. No, I'm absolutely not angry at you. I've got the shits because I've had a bad day at work, or this is annoying, or something else is going on. They go, okay, no dramas. Then they're fine. And if I'm still got the shits, or I'm still angry, they actually don't care, because they understand it's not them. So for you guys to be able to do that is so important, because then you can leave the impact of work at work. You can deal with the impact on you yourself through what we talked about in the last couple of slides. But then you don't let that bleed into your family and cause a grief for your husband, wife, and kids. And then another really good part of that is have a routine that helps you de-stress before you go home. So have a routine about something I'd love to see all police officers, and military is different. I get it, because you guys are normally deployed for a period of time, but even still to incorporate your physical training into it, and we'll touch on that again in a moment. But to have a routine that helps you de-stress before you go home means that to be able to go between your job and your home, go and do some training. So, for instance, like 7 a.m. when I started this podcast this morning, I got up at about 4, and I went and trained at 5 for an hour, because that's just the routine I'm in. So you can do it at any time of your day, but I suggest for you guys that are working shift work, and the police officers and first responders, military guys, train when you finish your shift. So it doesn't matter what time you finish, doesn't matter what happens, you always have the routine that you go and exercise for an hour, so that you can then, there's a buffer between you and your home life where you can de-stress, get yourself sorted, understand that it's just a stopgap. So you can stop being the hypervigilant cop that you were, and you can leave the shit that you saw in that shift behind through training, through getting your mind away from it, through moving your body, and that naturally just produces endorphins and all those sort of things so that you feel a lot better. And then as you move through all of that that sort of situation, once you get home, then you're actually a lot more relaxed because you've trained. You'll sleep better. You'll be a lot more calm. Your body's worked really hard to be able to, work off any of the stimulants like caffeine and all those things, that energy drinks and things that police and first responders use to get through their night shifts. And then when you come home, you're going to be a lot calmer and you're more exhausted, so therefore you've burned off a lot of that nervous and hypervigilant energy. Now, the big thing for you guys to understand this whole situation then is you can't just let it go. You have to take care of yourself. So this stuff is not going to look after itself. You're not going to just be able to sit back and let it happen and hope it all works out. You are going to need to look after it yourself. I just got a question for someone else here. You go, how do we handle it at home if both of us are on the job? That's a really good question. And you've got a real advantage. I've got a very good mate of mine who him and his wife are both police officers. And people like that are in a really advantageous situation because your partner understands what you go through and understands what the job's about. And they also understand that there's an impact of it. So you can talk about the things at work with your partner that you probably don't want to talk to if you have a non-police or first responder partner because of the impact emotionally that'll have on them. But you get the opportunity to be able to talk to them and say, this is what happened, this is why, this is how tough it is. And they can help you understand it and process it. So you've got your own built-in decompression ability there because you're both police officers or first responders. The downside of that you've got to be aware of is that you don't always talk about police work, and that's not what your life revolves around 24/7. But ultimately, that is a really advantageous situation. So thanks so much for shooting that question through. And the reason I'm not using people's names is just because this is totally anonymous. I don't want anybody to know who's asking questions, etc. But use those things to minimize the impact on your family, and just understand it is not going to take care of yourself. If you don't do something about it, it's not going to take care of itself. So we're just moving on now to the next part. Having a little bit of technical difficulty here. Hang on a sec. So now my computer has frozen up, guys. Sorry about that. So as my computer's just loading now, the next part that we're going to be going into is more now looking at the actual things you can use and what you can do in your life to make that difference to you as the police officer, as the first responder, to make sure that you're not letting all the things that are causing you the grief in your career bleed through. Now is the best way for you to operate so that it doesn't affect your life full time, if you like. So the next part that I'm going to go into now is what is the key to your long-term career. Now this one, I'm still just having a bit of an issue here with my computer. Just hold on for 1 second. It's just jammed up on me. Okay. Perfect. So the key to long-term career success, and these are four actual practical tips. So thanks so much for sticking with me through that first part, because a lot of that's just the explanation, but this is the part that is really gets to the point where you're going to understand that these 4 practical, physical, measurable steps will make a huge difference to how the job affects you and how your mental health progresses. So the keys to this long-term career success is nutrition, your physical training, sleep hygiene, and mindfulness. So I'm just going to go through all of them pretty quickly. mindful we've only got 15 minutes or so left for the podcast. But when you look at nutrition, something that I find is really not surprising to me, but is such an underutilized resource, is looking at the nutrition aspect of what you do in your job, the food you eat, how that impacts you physically, how that adds to your stress, how that does all those sort of things. Now, I'm not going to go into heaps of detail, but I'm going to touch on it. The nutrition part for you is the positive part is to eat clean food, not junk food. So clean food, like paleo or whatever, clean food is basically if it had eyes or it grew somewhere, eat it. If it didn't, don't. So packaged food's not clean food. Processed food's not clean food. But when you look at things like, obviously, meat, chicken, vegetables, fish, all those sort of things, fruit, all of that, seeds, nuts, etc., that's all really good for you. Now, I personally eat pretty much a paleo diet these days, but I still eat rice. I don't eat pasta. I don't eat grains, bread, or anything, because a lot of that pasta, bread is pretty much just turned to sugar in your system. And there's a lot of research coming out now, and has been for a couple of years, about how sugar is more addictive than cocaine or heroin in your brain. It's like 9 times more addictive. And it hits the same receptors when they do MRIs on people who are under the influence of cocaine or heroin or similar to people who are under the influence of massive sugar, or not even massive, but have sugar in their system. The same parts of the brain light up. So when you think about when you're driving around and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're trying to find something to eat, if you haven't pre-prepared decent food, and these days I think there's no reason, there's so much information on paleo and clean eating and those sort of things for you to do meal preps and carry around, like a cool box, an esky, whatever you call it, with some food in it for you, because you might get stuck at a job for 12 hours in the middle of nowhere where you can't access food. And going 12 hours without food, especially when you're in a state where you need a lot of energy and you need to be really alert and aware and vigilant, is counterproductive. And when you're only relying on food that is like high in sugar, then the problem for you in that instance is the sugar burns off extremely quickly and you're not having any long-term sustained energy from it. So you're constantly needing to pump more sugar into you to keep going. As you pump the sugar into you, your body dumps a lot of insulin. Insulin opens up the fat cells. So a lot of the energy that is in your bloodstream goes straight into those fat cells, hence the reason that people put on weight. Hence the reason cops can often be quite overweight, because they have a shit diet, don't exercise, shit sleep. So, and the nutrition part is also alcohol. Like alcohol, something I definitely used to self-medicate with, even though I didn't realize at the time. Alcohol is pretty much straight sugar, obviously. And so, again, any of your energy drinks, chocolates, all that sort of stuff that you use to stay awake and to pump yourself with sugar is not great for you. It's actually really bad for you. So your system's working overtime, burning all this really quick burn fuel. It's not getting into a good state where where it burns your body fat, or where it's operating out of better nutrition. And therefore, that's why you have such highs and lows, and that affects your mood really badly, and that definitely affects your mental state. So if you can think of it from the point of view, if you're eating a lot of processed, high-carb, high-sugar foods, that's like throwing fuel onto a fire. There's a massive big bang, and then it's done. If you're eating a good balanced, protein, carbs, fats, all very clean, natural foods, not processed, that's like putting the massive log on the fire, and it will burn for a long time and radiate a lot more heat or energy. So that's the analogy. Physical training is so important. Number one, for you to be tactically and operationally fit and ready. So if you need to chase somebody, if you need to fight somebody, all of those sort of things, if you need to carry people out of a building, if you need to kick down doors, you need to be able to, access unconscious people out of vehicle wrecks, all those sort of things. Your physical training is really important for your operational capability, but it's essential for your mental health, because, again, the harder you train, the better your body feels. So for me now at 47, I'm 99 kilos, about 14 or 15% body fat, which is about 220 pounds, 99 kilos. I'm 6'2", and I've never been fitter or healthier. I do CrossFit 4 or 5 days a week. I eat really clean. My resting heart rate's about 48 to 50 beats per minute. So my body's in a fairly relaxed state. the majority of the time. Now, if I went back to when I was in the police, I would be very surprised if my resting heart rate wasn't up around 75 or 80, because I was always stressed, always eating a lot of processed and sugary foods. So therefore, my body is always churning a lot faster. When your body's churning faster, you naturally become more tired. Being really tired impacts your mental health as well. So all of that accumulative effect is not going to be great for you. And that's when you move into your third part, is your sleep hygiene. So when you look at it, you see how this all rolls together. You've got shit nutrition that's full of sugar and everything. You don't operate at your best. If you're not physically exercising and training, then your body's not moving, and your body's working harder at rest because it's like you're not exercising and training it to be fitter. Then when you throw in broken or poor sleep, then they're three critical factors to some pretty bad health issues like heart attacks, those types of things, diabetes, all of those types of health issues. And unfortunately, those three big killers are often three things that police are pretty bad at, military first responders are pretty bad at, because of shift work, because of all those things, that how you operate in your lives and in your job. So your sleep hygiene is, I think, just have a routine. Whenever you are going in to sleep, have blackout curtains, have all those sort of things, and have your family understand that you getting that sleep is just essential. So I know heaps of police who work night work, might finish at 6 or 8 in the morning, get 3 or 4 hours sleep, and then get up and then go on with their day. And then they don't get back to sleep. So at the end of 7 nights or